Mr. Prince had gotten here. I know he's on his way up. We're here in state of Florida versus Segura, 2011, CF 2751. Let the record reflect defendants present with his attorneys. Anything we need to deal with before we start?
No.
All right. And I happen to be in the hall. And is Mr. Washington going to be your first witness?
He will, Your Honor. Yes,
We might want to bring him in before we bring the jury in. And he's been complaining. I'm not sure exactly what his complaint is, but we may need to deal with him before we get the jury in.
Yes, sir.
Let's have Mr. Washington in, please. You have a witness list, Mr. Prince, of what you expect to present today?
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Do you have a list of witnesses you expect to present today? Just handwrite one?
Yes, sir. I'll handwrite one.
Yeah. If there weren't otherwise a witness already.
No, yeah, I get it.
Mr. Washington was trying to talk to me in the hallway. Obviously, I can't talk to him. That's what I've told him. I don't know what the issue was, but I don't know whether we want to inquire before we bring the jury in.
I would like to talk with, who called me as a witness?
Mr. Prince is calling you.
I'd like to talk to Mr. Prince real quick, please.
We've got a jury waiting. We don't have time for that. All right. Let's have a jury, please. Everybody be seated, please. Any jurors need to report anything to me, any exposure to anything you shouldn't have been exposed to? Anybody? Nobody? All right. Mr. Prince, you may call your first witness.
At this time, the defense is called Mr. Gregory Washington.
All right. If you'd raise your right hand and be sworn, Mr. Washington.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony given in this case is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. You may proceed.
Mr. Washington, can you please introduce yourself to the jury and spell both your first and last name for the court reporter?
My name is Gregory Washington. My name is spelled GREGORYWASHINGTON. How y'all doing?
I see you're in jail garb there. Have you ever been convicted of a felony?
Yes, sir.
You know how many times off the top of your head? 20 sound right?
Yes, sir.
And any crimes involving dishonesty?
Yes.
You know how many times? 3 sound right?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Washington, do you know somebody named DeMario Paramore?
Yes, sir.
You know somebody named Haywood Griffin?
Yes, sir.
Tell me about your relationship with DeMario Paramore and Haywood Griffin.
We both grew up together out of the same hood. I knew Demario because she's supposed to be my grandma. His grandma and my grandma supposed to be cousins long down the line, but we know each other very well, grew up, hung out together, basically like family.
Okay. Very close all throughout your
Yes, sir.
formative years. All right. I want to direct your attention back to, I guess, January, December 2010 going into 2011. Were you still close with Mr. Paramore during that time?
Yes, sir.
At some point during the time frame we were discussing there, did Mr. Paramore make statements to you about this case?
Yes, sir.
What did he tell you about this case and his involvement in this case?
Basically, he told me that the male that is deceased, that him and Mr. Griffin killed them due to the fact that she owed them money, and she was playing around with their money, not going to pay him. So he boasted me about that they had the offer off. Like basically, they told me he told me that they killed them in the family.
What was the money owed for?
Drugs.
So his statement to you was that she owed them money for drugs, and that's
Yes,
why
sir.
they killed her. Did he tell you why they killed the children?
Like I said last time, from my recollection, it was leave no witness behind. They don't need to leave no witnesses behind.
That was his explanation?
Yes, sir.
At some point, did you contact the Tallahassee Police Department regarding the statements that Mr. Paramore had made to you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And fair to say part of your motivation for doing that was to help yourself out with your own case?
Yeah, I was in trouble dealing with a theft charge and other pending charges, so
Okay.
I just tried to find the information.
Okay. Did you provide that information to the Tallahassee Police Department?
Yes, sir.
What happened after you provided?
They, for about 3 weeks, came out to the county jail and talked to me about it. Had me to give details of when, how, why Mr. Paramore confessed to me about it. I took the trip in the car and showed them where DeMario Paramore and Haywood Griffin lived at. That to show that I know them. And we just, about 3 weeks, that's what they did.
At some point, did they go through the process of documenting you as a confidential informant?
Yes, sir.
After you were documented as a confidential informant, did they send you out to conduct conversations with Mr. Paramore while wearing a wire?
Yes, sir.
During the course of those conversations, the recorded conversations where you were on the wire, did Mr. Paramore again confess to committing the offenses to you?
Yes, sir.
Did he say essentially the same thing that you told us before?
Yes, sir.
Was Detective Fazio from the Tallahassee Police Department the person who was working with you and responsible for listening over the wire while that was happening?
Yes, sir.
I have no further questions for the witness at this time.
Cross.
Yes, Your Honor. Morning again, Mr. Washington.
Good morning, Mr. Fields.
We go back a long way, don't we?
Yes, sir.
Let's talk about a little bit about that time back in 2011. That was in March of 2011 when this happened, correct?
About the
Whenever-
confession?
When you talked to law enforcement about the situation, about Mr. Paramore.
Actually, it was in December of 2010 and 2011 or January when I talked to them about that. I brought it to their attention when I got caught stealing in the Governor Square Mall and J.C. Penney's. When they got me, I brought it to the arresting officer's attention about the confession that Mr. Paramore made to me. So then they, later on that night at the county jail, that when the investigators came out there and talked to me, so I talked to them like in December of 2010. I think that was the 30th or the 31st of 2010. I talked to them about that, so I brought it to attention in 2010 of December.
Okay. Whenever all this was going on, you were being locked up at Leon County Jail, right? You got
Yes, sir.
locked up there?
Yes, sir.
And during this time period, you were repeatedly, and not only that time, but before even then, the last time before that you were locked up, you make a career out of, or you not make a career, but you do a lot of snitching and talking and giving information on other persons, don't you?
Yes, sir.
Trying to help yourself out, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Whenever this last petty theft came up, wasn't it true that the offer for you was for the maximum of 5 years in prison?
Yes, sir.
And then you reached out to Jack Campbell afterwards, because you kept trying to call the state attorney's office and work out some sort of deal and snitch on this person or that person, and I actually banned you from calling the state attorney's office any further, didn't I?
Yes, sir.
And that's because you just kept calling and calling and calling in the situations we've had before, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And in this particular case, you knew you had to come up with something big in order to help you out of that 5-year prison sentence, didn't you?
Yes, sir.
And at this point, you come forward and you tell about Mr. Paramore.
Yes, sir.
All right. And then after you do that, the law enforcement officers wire you up and you send you out, correct?
Yes, sir.
And they did 4 different times you went out, right?
Yes, sir.
And each time you tried to get Mr. Paramore to say what it is you wanted him to say, right?
Yes, sir.
And you didn't do it on the first time. Didn't do it on the second time. Didn't do it on the third time. And it was actually the 4th time that what he said was, I guess the kids had to die because they couldn't leave witnesses. Isn't that what he said?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so he never actually said on that 4th time recording, he never said on the recording that he had killed them. He just said that the kids had to die because
They
didn't
won't
want-
leave no witness.
there weren't any witnesses to be left.
Yes, sir.
We all agree that that's why the kids probably had to die, is because they didn't want to leave any witnesses, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And just to be clear, all your conversations had to do with between you and Mr. Paramore, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right, no further questions.
Redirect.
Hold on one second, I'll take it, John. Now, Mr. Paramore, also, whenever you've been subsequently locked up, obviously you're there now.
Yes, sir.
At some point, you were had interactions and you were in the same pod with Mr. Segura, were you not?
Yes, sir.
I would object at this point.
Let's go sidebar, please.
Using Mr. Fuchs's language, what exactly did Mr. Segura say to you?
When I got in he came in the part, and a lot of people was talking to him when he came in the part, and he come in there and he said, He called me. I came over to him, and he was like, asked me who I was. I was like, I'm Goat G. So he was like, oh, you the one know about
Repeat
me.
that again. Say that again. I didn't quite understand what you said.
He said, oh, you Goat G. Goat G, my nickname, Goat G.
Okay.
Can you
So-
spell that for the court reporter?
Goat with a big G, capital G, Goat G. So he said, aren't you Goat G? And I was like, yes. So I guess people told him about me knowing about his case or whatever. So he was like, I basically told him what had happened, how I talked to law enforcement, how law enforcement had me do the drug buys and the confession that he made. And he was
When you
like,
say he made, you're talking about.
Demario Paramore, and he asked him about it, and I told him about it. Then he said, oh, excuse me, Lane. He said, oh, so a bitch commit murder and get away with it. So I was like,
Now-
what?
No, okay, go ahead, if there's more to
I was
say.
like, what? He was like, a bitch can commit murder and get away with it. So I kept on asking him, about basically, cause I at first I'm like, are you for real? About getting away with somebody else taking the fall for something that you did. So he was like, I just trying to make sure I understood what he was saying. But go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, when he said that, somebody can, or expletive can commit murder and get away with it. Isn't it just as likely that he was referring about the person who you just told him had confessed to committing the murder? He was the person who had gotten away with it, right? The person
Objection,
who
Your
confessed
Honor.
to committing the murder?
Sustained.
Mr. Washington, what was your interpretation at the time?
To be honest with you, I was taking it as he's saying that he actually got away with murder.
You took it as him saying he got away with it.
Yeah.
But he was the person in the county jail at the time, correct?
Yes, sir.
Not the person who had confessed to committing murder.
Yes, sir.
Right. Another thing that I wanted to ask you about was the
It
language.
was not clear to me. Was that the end of the conversation?
No, basically, I'm going to tell you what happened. When I kept on inquiring about it, and he said, well, I said, I don't understand. What you mean? He kept on saying, a bitch can commit murder and get away with it. Then I was like, what? Then he was like, I can commit murder and get away with it. Basically, that's what he was saying. That's what he said to me. I can commit murder and get away with it.
So your testimony now is that Henry Segura specifically said he could commit murder and get away with it.
I interpreted what he said as I can commit murder and get away with it. I interpreted that.
Mr. Washington, Mr. Segura never said he could commit murder and get away
You
with it.
asked
Isn't
me
that
how
true?
do I perceive it.
You perceived it that way.
I perceived it when he said a bitch can get away and get murdered. You asked me how I felt, how I perceived it when he presented it. So that's how I perceived it.
That was just your perception.
That was my
correct?
perception.
That's not what he actually said. His quote was, "A bitch could commit
A
murder
bitch
and
can
get away
commit murder and get away with it.
Okay. Now, with respect to the specific language that Mr. Paramore used during the on-wire conversation, where Detective Fazio was listening in, Mr. Fuchs's question was about, well, I guess the kids had to die, so there were no witnesses, something to that effect. Isn't it true that what he actually said was, quote, you don't leave any witnesses, dead men don't talk? Isn't that the case?
Not for me. When me and DeMario first had this conversation, he told me specifically that him and Mr. Griffin had committed the murder. Killed the girl because of money she owed. She was playing effing game with their money. Now, at the last other conversation we had dealing with that day, he said, if I'm not mistaken, you can't leave no witnesses.
Do you recall this specific quote, dead men don't talk?
I may recall, sounds similar, yeah.
Do you recall it or not?
I don't recall it, but he
Yeah,
may have
absolutely.
said that. He may have said, I'm not denying that he didn't say it.
I'm going to object at this point, before he shows him that document showing a police report, not a sworn statement or any transcription of that. Just refreshing
And
yourself.
you can refresh a recollection with anything, so this is just refresh a recollection. Just read it to yourself, Mr. Washington.
After having had a chance to read that, does that refresh your recollection about the specific quote about which I was inquiring?
Yes, sir.
And now do you recall that he did say on the on-wire conversation that his reason for killing the children was that dead men don't talk?
Yes, I recollect what he said. On that, he's saying exactly what I just said. You leave no witnesses. Then he said dead men don't talk.
Right. I have
Yes,
no
sir.
further questions at this time.
Okay, you can step down. Call your next witness.
It's time, Your Honor.
I'm sorry. Does jurors have questions of this witness? Any juror have a question of this witness? I'm sorry. If I forget, y'all just raise your hand. I occasionally will forget. You can step down, Mr. Washington. Next witness.
It's time, Your Honor, the defense would call Detective Vinny Fazio.
Somebody need to get him.
Please step up.
Please, the clerk can be sworn, please, sir.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give in this case is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Have a seat. Slide up the microphone, please, sir.
Detective Fazio, could you introduce yourself to the jury and spell your first and last name for the court reporter?
Sure. My name is Sergeant Vincent Bosio. My first name is V as in Victor, I-N-C-E-N-T. My last name is Bosio. B as in boy, O-C-C-I-O.
Detective Fazio, you were the one, along with Anne Marie Johnson, who went to Texas at some point during the investigation of this case to meet with Kelsey Kennard, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And because he was in a federal correctional institution, you weren't able to bring in recording equipment, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. You recall that conversation that you had with Mr. Kennard at the time?
Yes.
Okay. And in recounting the details of the murder as he claimed Mr. Segura gave them to him, did he at any point ever mention anything about children?
No.
Okay. Was he able to give you any specific details about how the offense was committed back then?
No.
Okay. I want to ask you about your involvement with the Paramore, Griffin, Gregory, Washington aspect of this case. You were the one who received the initial information from the patrol officer who arrested Mr. Washington, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. What did you do when you received that information initially?
Myself and Sergeant Cecily at the time went to the Leon County Jail to interview the person who was providing the information.
That was Gregory Washington?
Yes.
At some point, did you go through the process of documenting him as a confidential informant?
I did, not myself, but we have Vice Narcotics, our special investigations. That's where confidential informants are registered through. He was assigned to a case agent, so I assisted him in documenting them.
And you've been in special investigations before, correct?
That's correct.
So can you describe for the jury what that process is, what it means to be documented as a confidential informant?
Sure. When we're documenting someone as a confidential informant, we do an extensive background check on them. We'll find out their criminal histories, find out what information they have, make sure that they're not banned from any other law enforcement agency, using them to basically to check on the reliability and the credibility of the person.
So there has to be kind of a minimum bar of veracity and believability before you're willing to document somebody as a CI, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, in this case, Mr. Washington went through that process and was documented, correct?
Yes.
All right. What did you have him do once he was documented?
He wore a undercover wire and made contact with his cousin at the time, Demario Paramore.
Okay. During the course of those on-wire conversations, were you able to listen into what was going on?
Yes.
And as it turned out after the fact, those recordings were not of sufficient audio quality to be able to decipher what was being said, but could you hear at the time what was being said?
Correct.
And during the course of those conversations, did Mr. Paramore allude to the fact that,
Object us to hear, so.
Overruled.
did Mr. Paramore at the time allude to the fact that he had participation in these murders, Brandy Peters and her children's murders?
He didn't say participation, but he made comments in reference to it, yes.
Did he allude to the fact that he had some participation in the murders?
Again, it wasn't participation. It was, he made a comment towards the homicides, yes.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Let the record reflect and show the witness a copy of this police report. This is one of your reports, correct?
That is correct.
Is it a true and accurate copy of one of your reports?
Yes, sir.
Do you recall writing in your report, Paramore alluded to the fact that he had some participation in these murders?
I do remember writing that.
Okay. Do you also recall hearing during the course of the conversation on wire between Mr. Washington and Mr. Paramore saying, "You don't leave any witnesses, dead men don't talk"?
That's correct.
I have no further, well, actually, let me ask a couple follow-ups based on that. After you got that information, did you have a chance to go interview Mr. Paramore?
Yes.
Okay. During the course of that interview, were you provided with alibi witnesses by Mr. Paramore?
He provided his wife and kids as his alibi witnesses.
And when we say alibi witnesses, we're saying people who could corroborate that he was someplace else during the time when the murder was committed?
That's correct.
Okay. Did he also provide a buccal swab for DNA comparison?
Yes.
And did he give you information about what phone number he was using at the time?
Yes.
And did he indicate that the phone number he was using at the time was a 386 number that belonged to his brother?
And including his wife's phone, yes.
Okay. Now, at no point did anybody from the Tallahassee Police Department make any effort to obtain statements from those alibi witnesses, is that right?
His wife and kids? No, that's correct.
At any point prior to 2016, was Mr. Paramore's buccal swab ever sent to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement for analysis?
No, because we didn't have to.
And as far as the phone records go, did anybody ever go talk to his brother and find out what that phone number might have been?
No, sir.
Did anybody ever request records from any of the cell phone carriers in his brother's name?
No.
Like any records associated solely with his brother's name?
No.
And isn't it true that the reason for that was that based on your conversation with Mr. Paramore, you had a gut feeling that he was being truthful with you?
That wasn't just solely the reason why.
Was that the main reason why? Would that sum up your feelings on the issue?
No.
Okay. Do you recall giving a deposition in this case?
Yes, sir.
Do you recall that you were under oath at that deposition?
Yes, sir.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
I apologize, I don't have a second copy for you here, but I'll show you where I'm reading from. For the state's reference, this is page 23, starting at line 14. Question, so if his DNA, which was provided, is never compared to exclude him as a witness, and his cell phone data is never obtained to exclude him as a witness, and none of his alibi witnesses are ever questioned to exclude him as a witness, how is it that he's so easily dismissed after he confessed? And if it's just as simple as you've been doing this forever and you could tell based on the interview that he was obviously full of it, that's fine, I just want to know. Your answer, yeah. That's pretty much it? Yeah, that pretty much sums it up. So basically you could tell based on your interview that your feeling was he was telling the truth.
If you're asking what my feeling was, yeah, I could tell he was telling the truth.
But that was without having conducted any follow-up investigation of the nature we discussed.
Well, actually, there was follow-up investigation done.
Were his phone records ever obtained from his brother?
If you, we can go into the details if you want me to, sir.
Sure.
Okay. We did many court orders in this case, probably a total of 50. We actually did court orders on Paramore's girlfriend at the time, got her cell phone records. We were able to review the records and see what numbers were on there, the 386 area code that he's speaking of. There was 2 phone numbers on there. We did court orders on them as well and excluded them as potential suspects. We also looked at Griffin's cell phone records to see what phone numbers were consistent with the girlfriend to try to narrow it down and identify Paramore's cell phone numbers. We did court orders on them and excluded them as suspects as well.
Okay, well, let me ask you about using his girlfriend's phone numbers, because during the course of the interview, the phone number that Mr. Paramore told you he was using at the time was his brother's phone, not his girlfriend's phone, right?
Actually, if you listen to the interview, because I went back and listened, he actually said I was using my girlfriend at the time and my brother's, the 386.
Okay.
That's the reason we use that.
I got you. So you got his girlfriend's records, but not his brother's records?
That's correct, yes, sir.
Okay, and likewise, the DNA was never sent off during the course of the investigation?
Because again, we didn't have to.
Okay, you didn't have to. And then with respect to the alibi witnesses, again, none of the alibi witnesses were ever interviewed about whether he was actually where he claimed to be during his interview with you?
That's correct.
Okay, no further questions.
Cross,
Your Honor, can we approach, please? I'm sorry.
go to sidebar.
Investigator Fazio, first and foremost, you said a couple of different times as it relates to the DNA from Mr. Paramore that you didn't have to submit it.
That's correct.
My understanding is Mr. Paramore had a criminal history. Mr. Paramore would have had a criminal history?
Oh, yes, at that time, yes.
Okay. And there are certain databases that you utilize for investigative means that contain that DNA, and anything what has been submitted would have returned a hit essentially as to his DNA.
That is correct.
And that's why you didn't.
That is correct.
You were asked about your views as to Mr. Paramore. Well, let's go back if we can. Let's talk about Gregory Washington if we can. Isn't it true that Gregory Washington, whenever you attempted to utilize him, was problematic? You had very, very long, extensive conversations with the state attorney's office, including myself and Mr. Campbell, about utilizing Mr. Washington for a confidential informant.
That is correct.
And there was a lot of hesitation because of the history of Gregory Washington.
Yes.
But given that Mr. Washington was facing a charge of petty theft and we were investigating quadruple homicide, it was decided that he could be utilized in this situation because of the gravity of the investigation, correct?
That is correct.
And we're talking about 6 months after the investigation, correct?
Yes.
And if I'm not mistaken, at this point, Mr. Segura was a suspect, but even then, you still decided to explore other means, correct?
Yes.
And other avenues of the investigation.
That is correct.
And you utilized Mr. Washington.
Yes.
And then you talked about Mr. Paramore and your views in talking to the investigation. You've been to investigative schools.
Yes.
Had multiple investigations and interrogations or interviews, correct?
That's correct.
How long you been a law enforcement officer?
17 years.
You're a sergeant now, which means you made your way through the rank.
That's correct.
And those skills that you utilize in conducting the interviews, are those the same skills you utilize in evaluating Mr. Paramore's testimony?
Yes.
And then you compare those, as I understand it, with the databases we just talked about and other avenues and things, other investigative means, correct?
That's correct.
And at that point, that was what was your judgment as to Mr. Paramore, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. In this situation also, let's talk also about Mr. Kennard. Some questions were asked of Kelsey Kennard in your interview there about whether or not he identified kids specifically. Isn't it true that Mr. Kennard stated to you and told you that Mr. Segura said, or I guess Mr. Kennard told you that Mr. Segura said that there was a quadruple homicide, meaning multiple persons?
That's correct.
Okay. That he told you that he killed 2 people there initially, but 2 others came home.
Yes.
So a total of 4.
That's correct.
Okay. So it wasn't that he didn't tell you there weren't multiple people, he just didn't tell you the age of the people.
That's correct.
No further questions.
Redirect.
Detective Fazio, with respect to Mr. Paramore's buccal swab, you said that you didn't have to send it off. However, the swab could have been compared to evidentiary samples found at the scene, correct?
Sure.
Because not every evidentiary sample found at the scene runs through the databases you're referring to. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And that wasn't performed at the time. It wasn't sent off to FDLE during the course of the investigation.
At that time, no.
Thank you. No further questions.
Any juror have a question of this witness? All right, write your question down, please. Couple of follow-up questions from the jury sergeant. Where did Mr. Paramore indicate he was on the night of the murders?
Remember, this was 6 months later, so he gave us his typical Friday night, what he would do. He basically said he was at the house. He would go to a convenience store, pick up some alcohol, and then he might go to a club. And that was his routine on a Friday night. So he really couldn't give us specifics, just on a routine basis on a Friday night, that's what he would do.
You were asked about the buccal swabs from Mr. Paramore. Were they sent to FDLE to be compared to any potential DNA from the crime scene?
Eventually they were, yes, they were.
Okay. Follow up, Mr. Prince?
Yes, sir, Your Honor. Isn't it true, Detective Fazio, that the buccal swabs were only sent off in 2016 following the deposition where I gave you a hard time about the fact that it was never tested?
It wasn't sent by me, if that's what you're alluding to, but it was sent after the deposition, yes, sir.
In 2016,
Correct.
like 5 years after Mr. Segura had been arrested?
Yep, and still no match.
Okay. And are you also aware that it was compared, his buccal swab was compared to only one of the over 200 DNA samples obtained from the scene in this case?
No, sir.
Okay.
Follow up?
Yeah, if I can briefly, regarding Mr. Paramore's statement, you've said that this interview actually conducted 6 months later, correct?
That is correct.
He was not able to give you any specifics because it wasn't an event that stood out in his mind?
That is correct.
He was able to give you general things of what he would have done around that time period, but nothing specific, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Makes it a little more difficult to track down an alibi if, or where he was 6 months later when he really couldn't tell you.
Absolutely.
Fair to say, Mr. Fazio, that you remember things that are a startling event in your life.
Yes.
You don't necessarily remember the day-to-day activities 6 months later, correct?
That's correct.
Would that be consistent with what Mr. Paramore was telling you?
Yes, sir.
There was let me just comment, there was a question about the results. This is not the right witness to give you DNA results. He's not a DNA expert, so I can't ask him scientific questions that would not be appropriate. So you can step down, Mr. Fazio.
Thank you, sir.
Next one.
This time, Your Honor, the defense would call Griffin, Haywood Griffin. Sorry.
Is it going to take a while? Do we need a break? Okay.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness standing, please?
You may. Okay. Okay, all right. But one of the jurors has requested a break. We'll take 10 minutes.
He's still here.
Huh?
We verified he's still here.
I was told by the bailiff's unit he'd been returned. Yeah.
We just checked during the
He's
breakdown.
taken the fifth. We can't call him to ask him. That's an incriminatory question as to whether he knows, whether he's in the drug business or knows this guy's a drug dealer. I mean, he's taken the fifth. We don't have any ability to override that.
I would submit he doesn't stand to be exposed to any criminal charges, and would submit that his criminal conduct during the period he described, knowing Angel Avila, the statute of limitations is long since passed. And on that basis, he can't invoke his right against self-incrimination, where he can't be incriminated simply by saying that he knows who Angel Avila is. And he doesn't have to get into how he knows Angel Avila. I would just intend to ask the question, do you know who he is?
He's invoked his fifth. That's up to his attorney to decide that. I'm not going to try to override that. So, no, I'm not going to let you call Mr. Santos for that purpose. We ready with this witness?
Yes, sir.
Let's have a jury, please. Everybody be seated. You may proceed, Mr. Prince.
Mr. Griffin, can you please introduce yourself to the jury and spell your first and last name?
This
Oh, I'm sorry.
please.
I'm sorry.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, ma'am.
Give us your name, please, sir.
Haywood Griffin,
And spell your name for us, please.
Hayward, Griffin.
Would you slide a little closer to that microphone, please, sir?
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Griffin, do you know someone named DeMario Paramore?
Yes, sir.
How long have you known him for?
Over 20 years.
Okay. What was your relationship with him back in 2010, 2011?
He always been a friend.
Okay. Was he a business associate as well?
I know Paramore. I mean, we both from the streets. I know Paramore. We've been knowing each other for a long time.
And when you say you run the streets, you were involved in illegal drug trafficking with him?
No, I'm in prison as he's a co-defendant in the case I'm incarcerated on. No, we did not do drug trafficking. We did business together.
Okay. Was the business that you were in together drug trafficking? Drug sales?
Maybe, yeah.
Okay. So I'm not using the correct terminology as far as you're concerned. You guys did drug sales together?
Yeah,
illegal drug sales.
I'm incarcerated as a result of it.
And he was one of your co-defendants, or was your co-defendant?
Yeah, co-defendant in that case that I'm doing time for right now.
That's a federal drug trafficking case.
It's a federal conspiracy case.
Conspiracy to engage in drug sales.
It's a conspiracy case.
And what was the nature of the conspiracy alleged?
It's a drug conspiracy case.
Okay. What about Gregory Washington? You know who that is?
Yes, I do.
You had interaction with Gregory Washington back in 2010?
No, sir.
No interaction with him at all?
No, sir.
Okay, but you did and were interacting with DeMario Paramore?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What about Kenny Green, also known as Kalo? You know him?
I know him.
Okay. And did you know who he was back in 2010 and then in the early part of 2011?
I know him like about saying we ain't associates like that, but I know him.
How well did you know him?
By seeing him, I know him, you heard of him. I know him if I see him. But we are not like nobody that I talk to or anything, but I do know him if I was to see him.
Okay. Are you aware of Mr. Green, or were you aware, I guess is the best way to ask it, were you aware of Mr. Green's drug trafficking activities?
I know he was in the streets. I don't know his business.
You don't know his business at all?
Me and him never had any dealings with each other.
You and he never had any dealings, direct or indirect?
We ain't have no dealing.
Okay. Do you recall giving a statement to law enforcement in this case?
Law enforcement asked me some questions about this case a while back.
Right. You recall giving that statement?
What statement?
Do you recall talking to law enforcement about this
Yes.
case? Okay.
Yes, I have.
Let me direct your attention to page 80 of that transcript in front of you there.
80,
Yes, sir. Lines 18 through 19.
okay.
Do you recall telling law enforcement specifically, now I have did business with Kalo third party? You recall that?
That's what it said.
That's what you said, right?
I can't recollect that statement, but I mean, that's what the paper said.
Okay. So you had done business with Kalo through some third party, correct?
According to the document.
I'm asking you.
You said in 2010?
At any point, have you done drug dealing, drug selling business with Kalo through a third party?
I mean, according to the document, that's what it says, I said.
I'm not asking what the document says now. I'm asking you whether you
I
did.
can't really recollect that I remember doing dealings with Cato, period.
Okay. Do you recall that Kalo, as of the time of your interview, had just had a baby by your sister-in-law? Do you recall that?
My sister-in-law?
Yeah, your ex-wife's sister.
My ex-wife's sister. I
That's
think
right.
he had a relationship. We had a baby from her or something. I think I probably was locked up during that time.
Do you recall that, though?
Do I recall that he had a baby from her? I know he had a relationship with her. They say he probably had a baby from her, but I wasn't around at the time. Me and her was divorced at that time that they had a relationship or whatever, when she supposed to have a baby. Me and my ex-wife was divorced during that time.
The question I'm trying to ask you is whether you are aware that Kalo, had a baby with your ex-wife's sister.
Yes, I am aware.
And you were aware of that as of the time of your interview, correct?
The interview that's on the paper,
Right.
I can't remember.
Would it refresh your recollection if I showed you a portion of the transcript that dealt with that issue?
I mean, I knew he had a relationship with her. I mean, but like I said, me and my ex-wife was not together at that time. I was not a part of their life or anything of that nature. So I really wasn't personally in their business or whatever they had going on.
Okay. Isn't it true that you had a falling out with Kalo at some point?
At some point, you give us a little
Yeah.
more
Yes, sir.
specific than that.
Isn't it true that you had a falling out with Kenny Green, Kalo, in 2010?
Not that I could recollect.
Okay. You recall again your interview with law enforcement, right? You recall giving that interview, right?
I recall talking to law enforcement about this particular situation.
Okay. And do you recall looking at page 82, line 20 to 21, telling the
Wait a
investigator?
minute, let him catch up with it. Line,
You said 82,
page
right?
Page 82,
line
okay.
21.
Yes, sir. Line 20 through 21.
Okay.
Do you recall telling Investigator Dubrava, me and Kalo is not friends, me and Kalo had a falling out? You recall saying that?
I must have said it.
Okay. At the beginning of your interaction with law enforcement,
Okay.
did you tell them that you only had heard of Kalo from being incarcerated with him?
I only heard of Kalo being incarcerated with him.
You had only heard of some person named Kalo, and the way that you heard of him was being incarcerated with him at the beginning of your interview with him.
I don't remember.
Okay. Would it refresh your recollection if you referred to the transcript of your interview?
I mean, I know Kalo, like I said, if I see him. Me and Kalo was not friends. We never was associates or anything. We from two different sides of the city. So, I really can't recollect really me and him even having really too much interactions or anything of that nature.
Well, the question that I'm asking about right now is what you started out saying your relationship with Kalo was.
My relationship with Kalo was what? What I said. You asked me that?
My question for you now is, do you recall at the beginning of your interview with law
Why don't we
enforcement?
go to what you
Yes, sir.
contend he said, and
Starting-
be specific
Yeah.
about it?
Yes, sir.
Let's go, we got a page number,
Yes, sir, page 19,
Page
starting at line
19.
20.
line 20,
Yes, sir.
page 19, line 20.
Okay.
Do you recall being asked, do you know a person by the name of Kalo? Yeah, I heard of him. Do you know him? I know him, but I don't know him. I know him because, if you know people, I know him because I was locked up with him at one time. That's what you told him, right?
That's what it says. I was locked up with him at one time.
So you told him at the beginning, the only way you know Kalo is because you heard of him, you were locked up with him, and by the end, you're doing business with him through a third party, he's got a baby with your ex-wife's sister, and you had a falling out with him.
That's about 3 questions, Mr. Prince. Let's do one question at a time, please.
Okay, so at the beginning, you say you only heard of him because you were locked up with him, is that right?
That's right.
After that, you admit that you had business dealings with him through a third party.
That's right.
And after that, you admit that he had a baby with your ex-wife's sister, correct?
That's right.
And after that, you admit that you had a falling out with him, correct?
That's what the documents say.
As a result of the drug investigation that was precipitated by your interview in this case, your interview in the Brandy Peters murder, you were ultimately arrested. That's the charge that you're in custody for now, right?
The charge that I'm arrested for right now has nothing to do with this.
I just mean in terms of timing, they coincided. You were interviewed for this, that led to the execution of a search warrant at your home, which led to your
I was
current charges.
interviewed for this after I was already arrested.
Okay,
I was not interviewed for this prior to me being arrested.
I got you. Okay, so they at some point executed a search warrant at your house, right?
They executed a search warrant at my house at the time that they arrested me.
Gotcha. And how many guns did they recover from your house?
5.
No further questions for the witness at this time?
Cross.
Where was your house located at that time?
Marques Drive
Okay, and where is that in relation to the
on
neighborhood?
the south side of town.
Over there by Jack McLean Park and Rickards and stuff like that?
Yes, by the fairground.
Okay, it's by the fairgrounds?
Yes.
All right. You said 5 guns were recovered. What kind of guns are we talking about? One of them, a couple of them, like an AK-47 rifle.
AK-47 rifle,
Okay, any pistols?
2 pistols.
Fair to say you know how to use those guns?
Do I know how to use those guns?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, you shot a gun before.
Yes, I have.
You know how to put the right ammunition in a gun?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Were you asked, did you have anything to do with Brandy Peters' homicide?
No, sir.
All right. Mr. Prince is asking you a lot of questions about what you said to it on an interview back in 2011. That's when this interview occurred, right?
Yes, sir.
So a lot of things you said you couldn't remember.
Yes, sir.
Is that because you're trying to be evasive, or you just don't remember because it was 6 years ago?
It was over 6 years ago. At the time that I was arrested for some guns and some drugs. And they took me down to the station upon that date, and then they just started asking me about this particular case. So I was already kind of like dysfunctional just by being arrested and knowing the severity of the charges that I was already facing for the stuff that I got caught with. And when they started asking me about this right here, I didn't have no clue about this case. I didn't have no clue about what this had to do with me and my circumstances.
Any of those guns that were found at your house, a .32 caliber revolver?
No, sir.
All right. No further questions.
5 guns were listed in your statement of facts, and you were charged, or the government sought forfeiture of 5 guns, correct? Is that right?
They took 5 guns.
How many guns did you actually have?
That's how many guns I had.
Your testimony is that's how many guns you had? There were no more guns than that?
No.
I'm not asking how many they found. How many did you have?
That's how many guns I had.
That's your testimony?
That's my testimony.
No further questions for the witness at this time.
All right, any juror have a question of this witness? All right. Do we need to keep him any further?
I can't say for certain right now, Your Honor.
Well, we need to decide.
Yes, sir, Dave's gonna ask that he be retained.
All right, let's keep him. Next witness.
It's time the defense would call Investigator Nick Roberts.
No, I'm sorry, go ahead first.
This time the defense would call Lakeisha Garland.
Call your next witness, please.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense would call Investigator Mark Lewis.
Okay. May I proceed?
Investigator Lewis, can you please state and spell your first and last name again for the court reporter?
Good morning. My name is Mark, M-A-R-K, Lewis, L-E-W-I-S.
You remain under oath, Sergeant Lewis.
Yes, sir.
Do you recall in the course of your investigation reviewing or discussing with the other investigators letters that were found at Brandy Peters' residence?
Yes.
Okay. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Let the record reflect I'm showing the witness has already been entered into evidence as State Exhibit 98. Can you look through those and find the envelope that is dated November 17th, 2010? The envelope, not the letter.
Yes, sir.
You found that one?
Yes, sir.
Is that one of the letters that you reviewed in the course of the investigation?
I remember, I know we had a lot of letters that we found in the crime scene, yes.
Without going into who the inmate who sent that letter is, where is that letter sent from?
Where is it sent?
From?
It's sent from the Federal Detention Center, Tallahassee.
Okay. May I approach the witness?
You may.
At the Federal Detention Facility, I'm going to put this back.
I'm afraid if you're talking with your back to the jury, I'm afraid they may not hear what you're saying.
At the Federal Detention Center in Tallahassee, like all detention centers, they record phone calls, correct?
I suspect, I'm not familiar with the Federal Detention Center.
Okay. At any point during the investigation in this case, did you request the phone records from the Federal Detention Center or try to find out whether there were phone records from the Federal Detention Center for the inmate who sent this letter?
I don't recall doing that.
Okay. Did you ever discuss with C.C. Timmons the message on the outside of this envelope?
I didn't read that message, sir.
Okay. I have no further questions for the witness at this time.
I was making a note. What did you say, Sergeant? I'm sorry.
I don't recall reading that.
Okay. Any cross?
No.
Not at all.
I beg your pardon?
No, not at the time.
All right, you can step down. Call your next witness, please.
At this time, Your Honor, the defense would call C.C. Timmons. Ms. Timmons is having car troubles on the way. In the meantime, I'll call Marques Davis next.
Okay. You'd face the clerk and be sworn, please, sir.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, ma'am.
Have a seat. Slide up the microphone, please, sir.
Mr. Davis, can you please introduce yourself to the jury, spelling your first and last name for the court reporter?
Marques Davis, Marquis, Davis, Davis.
Mr. Davis, where were you living in 2010?
901 Saddle Creek Run.
Where was your house in relation to Brandy Peters' house?
Across the street, kind of parallel.
Who were you living with at that time?
Cecily Timmons.
Okay. Do you recall having interaction on the afternoon and evening of November 19th, 2010 with Tamaya, Tanaya, and Javante?
Yes.
And describe that interaction for us.
They played with my son and stepdaughter.
Okay. They were over at y'all's house?
Yeah.
Were you making anything for dinner that night?
Oxtails.
All right. When you finished making the oxtail stew, did you ask anybody to text Brandy to see if she wanted some?
Cecily. I asked her to see if she wanted some.
And did you end up giving some to Brandy?
Yes, I sent her a plate.
You sent a plate over for Brandy?
Yeah.
What about the kids, Javante, Tamaya, and Tanai? Did you feed them anything?
Yes, they stayed at my house and ate.
Okay. And that would have taken place after you texted or had Brandy texted to see if she wanted some?
Yeah, around the same time.
About what time do you think that was?
Around 7:30.
Okay. What did you do after you fed the girls and Javante?
I took my father some of the same food.
Where'd your father live at?
On Bermuda Road, out by North Florida Christian School.
Okay. So a little bit farther on the north side of town?
On the north side, yeah.
Okay. So you had to drive from your place down on the south side up to his place and back, is that right?
Yeah. Correct.
Did you go anywhere else in the meantime?
No, I went there, took him something to eat, checked the mailbox for him and went back home.
What time do you think you got back home at?
Maybe about an hour later, about 8, in between 8:30.
Between 8 and 8:30? Okay. And when you got back, did you notice a vehicle in Brandy Peters' driveway?
Yes.
What kind of vehicle was it?
A dark color SUV.
Okay. You're familiar with, well, you don't really know Mr. Segura first, right?
No, I've seen him before though.
Were you familiar with his truck though?
Yeah.
Okay. You know he had kind of a distinctive truck with fat back tires and a spoiler and all that?
Yeah. An older model pickup.
That vehicle that you saw in Brandy Peters' driveway was not his vehicle, correct?
No.
Okay. Now you were present at the scene the day that her and the kids were discovered, right, on the 20th?
Yes.
Okay. Did any member of any law enforcement agency ever ask you about anything?
No.
Were you aware at that time that your observations were at all relevant to the investigation?
No, not at the time, no.
Okay. At any point in the intervening 7 years since the offense, has anybody other than the defense contacted you to ask you what you know about this case?
No.
Why didn't you feel like it was important to come forward with that information on your own?
Like I didn't know the significance really, and like I said, no one never, the police or no one ever contacted me about, interviewing me or any of that.
Were you friends with Brandy?
I knew her, I knew her before she moved over there.
Okay. How long have you been knowing her?
I got a cousin that used to date her a long time ago. Like when her kids when the twins were in car, they were in car seats. I'm not sure how old they were.
her kids were friends with your kids, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. No further questions for the witness at this time.
Cross.
You said on, Ms. Peters' son was, or your son was playing with Ms. Peters' kids on that day?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Okay. And you sent a plate over there for
Yes, sir.
who is it that sent the plate? How'd you get over there? Give it to Artron?
One of the twins took it to her, and they came back.
So the girls took it over there and then turned around and came back?
Yeah, they came back. They ate at my house.
Okay. And you said that you sent it over there to her even though she said she didn't want any food?
I mean, you know, I don't know if she wanted it or not. I know I sent it. I was say I wasn't the one that spoke with her about eating the food.
Okay. And you said that was sometime around 7 o'clock?
Between 7:30 when I got through cooking.
Okay. And then after that, you took your father's son up to North Florida Christian area?
Yes, sir.
And you go in there and you give him his food?
Yes, sir.
Did you set it up, lay it down, anything like that?
No. I just put it on the counter, and like I said, I went out and checked the mailbox for him.
Okay. You didn't talk to him at all?
No.
All right. Walked in, dropped food on the ground, on the table, and checked the mailbox and left?
I mean, for us speaking, you know, we didn't have a conversation. I was
Okay.
going to bring him something to eat.
All right. And then you got back about an hour later?
Yeah.
And then saw this SUV?
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about this. Are you aware that Archeron said that the last time he saw the kids was when he came home from school around 5 o'clock, so they weren't over at your house?
That's not true. They were though.
Okay. In fact, at this particular time, you lived right across the street from Brandy, right?
Correct.
Law enforcement is everywhere because it's homicide. Is that true?
That's true.
Got the street blocked off,
Got my car taped up.
got your car taped off. They've interviewed Cece, they've interviewed your son, they're interviewing everybody on the entire street, and at no point did you say, hey, by the way, I saw him last night.
I mean, everyone know that they were there the night before.
Okay, you say everyone knows that night was there, but Ms. Timmons says that she didn't see him there the night before. Mr. Timmons, your son, Artron Timmons, says they weren't there the night before. So you say everybody saw him the night before, but apparently you're the only one that did.
No, that's not true.
Okay. But at this point, Brandy's an old friend of yours. You've known her for a long period of time. Law enforcement are everywhere. They're talking to people up and down the street or knocking on doors, and at no point you said, hey, by the way, I saw him last night.
I mean, no one came. They came and directly questioned them. No one came and asked me anything, you know. I wasn't putting myself out to get involved like that.
You weren't going to get involved with this person that you've known forever or for a very, very long time, and the fact that she was dead across the street from you and your family, you weren't going to get involved in that.
I mean, they didn't question me.
But they came to your house and asked questions of your wife and your son, right?
Apparently so, yeah.
Okay. And the first time you ever made this statement anywhere towards law enforcement, state attorney's office, anywhere was yesterday here in courtroom, right?
No.
No? Who'd you tell?
The investigators.
For which investigators?
For the defense.
Okay. Never told law enforcement people that were investigating the murder of your friend.
I mean, because they came and asked me.
Oh, yeah. No,
Redirect.
Do you remember if Cece and Artron ate with you and the kids?
No, they didn't.
They didn't eat with you guys?
No.
Okay. I think it's sometimes hard for people to understand, but can you explain a little bit about the cultural aversion to interaction with the police in the neighborhood y'all were from?
You know, like I said, they were there. They were outside of the house pretty much every day, but no one came and directly asked me anything.
And your general feeling, what was your general feeling on that day, at that time, about interacting with the police at all?
You know, kind of really didn't want to.
Notwithstanding the nature of the offense and your relationship with Brandy, that's just not something
Yeah.
you do.
I mean, you know, my brother was murdered, you know, and it hadn't been solved, you know. So, you know, confidence really in the police really in there.
Would you have spoken to law enforcement and given them truthful information
I
at the
mean,
time if they'd asked you?
If they asked me, you know, what I seen, I would have told them what I seen.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Any juror have a question of this witness? All right, you can step in. Need to keep him any further?
No, Your Honor.
Need him for any reason? No, Your Honor. All right, you ready to go? Call your next witness.
It's time the defense to call Darius Mount.
Come on up here, please, sir. You face the clerk and be sworn, please.
Yes, sir.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Have a seat. Slide it microphone, please, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Mount, can you please introduce yourself to the jury, spelling your first and last name for the court reporter?
Yes, my name is Darius Mount. That's Darius Mount, Mount.
Okay. Back in 2010, November of 2010, where were you living at?
That's 3574 Jim Lee Road.
And that's right kind of diagonally from Brandy Peters' house, correct?
That is correct.
Maybe 50 yards away or so?
I would say so.
Okay. Directing your attention to the early morning hours of November 20th, do you recall at some point you and your wife being home and hearing a dog barking?
Yes. Yes, I did.
Was it barking in a manner that was out of the ordinary, such that it caused y'all concern?
Absolutely. I generally come home around that time of night. At that time, I was working for Golden Corral. So generally, when I come home, it's typically pretty silent, not much going on. And even if I did hear a dog barking, it's certainly not enough for me to call the police. But it was different. It was absolutely excessive barking, completely out of the norm. Enough so that I asked my wife to come out and, asked her to look, just to listen to what I was hearing. And we both collectively agreed that we should call the police.
Do you know how long the dog had been barking?
No, I don't know how long the dog had been barking. It was as soon as I got out of my car, it was something that I heard immediately, and it got my attention. It was awkward.
And the direction of the barking was coming from right over by Brandy's house, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. What time was it that y'all called the police at?
It would have been between just about 1:15, 1:30, I'm assuming, between that time period.
In the early morning hours of November 20th, 2010?
That is correct.
No further questions for the witness at this time.
Cross.
Hey, Mr. Mount.
How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so you said you're just coming home from work that night at Golden Corral.
Yes.
And how long had you been on shift that night?
Really not sure. Those shifts typically can go anywhere from 10 to 12 hours.
All right, so by the time you get home, you said it was what time?
Between 1:15 and 1:30.
All right, so at that point, you're ready for bed, huh?
Most of the time. I might wind down, watch a little bit of news, or see if Rachel Maddox is on,
All right, yet you can't stop hearing those dogs that night, right?
I don't know at what point I stopped hearing them.
Okay, but the dogs were barking and you could hear it that night, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. And you were paying attention to the dogs barking. You didn't turn the TV up over them or anything like that. You could hear them, and you called police about it.
Well, again, when I first heard the dogs barking was when I was outside. I had gotten out of my car, and that's really what got my attention.
Okay. And when you were outside and you were hearing these dogs barking, did you hear any gunshots?
No.
What about when you called police? Did you hear gunshots then?
No.
What about afterwards when you were waiting on police to come? Did you hear gunshots then?
No.
All right. And 908 Saddle Creek Run, that house, Miss Peters' house, it backs up to the woods, doesn't it?
Yes.
And actually, all of the houses on that street, on Miss Peters' side of the street, they all back up to the woods, don't they?
For the most part.
Okay. The ones closest to your house do?
I think that's a fair assessment, yes.
Yes, sir. And probably some squirrels in those woods?
Yeah.
Squirrels, lots of squirrels in the woods? All right. Probably some snakes in the woods?
I don't want to find out, but
Rabbits in the woods and deer in the woods?
Possibly.
Okay. And deer, those animals are more active at night, right?
I would say so.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Mount, how many deer do you see on the south side?
Not many.
And to the extent there are animals in the woods, they're there every single night, right?
Every single night, yes.
How many nights of the week you call the police about that dog going absolutely berserk?
Only one.
Only that night ever?
Correct.
No further questions.
Any juror have a question of this witness? All right, I'm sorry. Go ahead, we'll go sidebar, write your question down. We had two follow-up questions from the jury. Do you know what dog was barking?
No, I do not.
So it wasn't a dog you were familiar with?
No, I'm not.
Okay. In the neighborhood, is it common for people to leave their garage door open while the children are out? I mean, I know this is 1:30 in the morning, but I'm talking about during the day. Is that typical?
I would say no. At that particular point in time, there were several strings of break-ins in the neighborhood. I was on the homeowners association around that time. I was actually on the board, so I would say no.
So you were encouraging people to lock up and keep their doors shut?
Right, there were several strings of break-ins in the community around that time. So no, a lot of people were very cautious about being very secure in the neighborhood around that time.
Okay. Any follow-up, Mr. Brent?
No, Your Honor.
Any follow-up, I'm sorry, Ms. Dugan? All right, you can step down.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. He's free to go.
Yes, sir.
Right.
We'd actually like to retain him. He can leave the courthouse and go about his business. We'll just be available.
Be subject to recall. Next witness, please.
This time, Your Honor, the defense will recall Officer Candace Jernigan.
So we had a problem with that headset the other day. When we had a problem with that headset making noise. Oh, I thought. Okay. Somewhere we're getting some feedback. I believe you were previously sworn, were you not?
Sir?
You were previously sworn?
Yes, sir.
All right, you remain under oath. You may sit down, slide up the microphone, please.
Officer Jernigan, can you again spell your first and last name for the court reporter, please?
It's first name Candice. Last name is Jernigan.
And again, I know it's been a while, but you were one of the first responding officers to 908 Saddle Creek, the victim's residence in this case, right?
Yes, sir.
On the morning of November 20th.
Yes, sir.
Did you, in the course of your police activities that morning, have a chance to speak to Monica Peters when she arrived on scene?
Yes, sir.
Do you recall Monica Peters specifically telling you that she had spoken to Brandy, as opposed to attempting to speak to Brandy, that she'd spoken to Brandy at approximately 10 p.m. the night before?
That is what she told me.
Thank you. I have no further questions for this witness.
Cross.
So you spoke to Ms. Peters the morning of November 20th, 2010?
Yes, ma'am.
And where did you speak to her?
Across the street from 908. It's on the corner of Saddle Creek and Jimley.
Okay. And about what time?
I have no idea what time it was.
What time did you respond?
I responded, I got on scene around 10:17.
Okay, so at some
So-
point after 10:17, you talked to her?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, and this is right across the street outside the home where her sister and her nieces and her nephew had just been murdered
Yes.
and found dead.
Yes.
All right. Safe to say Miss Monica Peters was pretty emotional that morning.
Yes, she was.
She was crying that morning.
Yes, and she was shaken. Yes.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Redirect.
No, Your Honor.
All right. Any juror have a question on this subject? Write your question down, please. Just, what's that?
I don't know if it's on this subject or not.
Well, it should be on this subject. Write it down, we'll decide. We got a sidebar? So what did Ms. Peters say about making what contact did Monica, I'm sorry, let me start. What did Monica Peters say about having contact with Brandy Peters?
She said she was upset, so I had to clarify with her a couple of times what she was saying. But to me, verbally, she said that she talked on the phone with her the night prior at around 9 or 10
9 or 10?
p.m., approximately 10 p.m.
And did she say what number she used to make contact with her?
No, sir. I had asked her at some point if she had a cell phone, if Brandy had a cell phone, but that's the only discussion that we had about the phone.
And you may or may not be able to answer this question, but when canvassing the area of a crime scene, do you know how it is determined how large of an area to canvass?
As far as on the external part of the house or the internal?
Talking about the neighborhood, what we're talking, canvassing of the neighborhood.
I mean, I can just tell you what I overheard.
But the
people
question
saying,
is,
yeah, I
in
don't-
general, do you know how that is determined, how wide of an area to canvass?
No, sir. But this type of situation, I know we went and talked to neighbors, but no, sir, I couldn't specifically say since I was the first responding. I was busy with the scene and interviewing.
Okay. All right. Any follow-up, Mr. Prince?
No, Your Honor.
Any follow-up, Ms. Dugan?
Yes, sir. Did Monica Peters ever give you any indication she talked to Brandy in any other way other than Brandy's cell phone?
No.
And canvassing the neighborhood, would that normally include the house right across the street?
Canvassing as far as just speaking,
Yeah.
trying to
if you
find
were going to talk
witnesses.
to the neighbors, would that normally
Yes.
include the house across the street?
Yes.
That's it.
All right. Anything further?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Do we need to keep this? Well, let's do this. Let's let the jury step out. We're about due for break anyway. Let the jury step out. Confused at what kind of point you were trying to make.
Yes, sir. Officer Jernigan, I want to ask you about another witness that you spoke to, Dahana Scott. Do you recall that? It's referenced on page 607 of your report, near the top.
Do you mean Leon Scott?
Leon.
Or his wife, Dahana Nelson Scott?
Yes,
sir.
ma'am. A few questions. Do you recall Ms. Scott saying that she observed an SUV, a white Suburban type vehicle, in Brandy's driveway between 10:50 and 11 p.m. when she arrived home that night?
Yes, sir. I was talking with her by phone. But by phone, she mentioned during our conversation that, yes, she had seen a Suburban type vehicle in the driveway between 10:50 and 11.
Do you recall her also telling you that she looked out her back porch and observed her dog? Let me clarify this first, actually. Ms. Dahana Scott and Leon Scott lived right next door to Brandy. So if you're facing the house, they lived right to the right of Brandy, correct?
Yes, sir. If you're facing, they live to the east, the right.
And did Ms. Scott tell you that she looked out her fence at some point and observed her dog pacing back and forth, facing Brandy's house along the fence there, facing 908 Saddle Creek, Brandy's home?
Let's see. She said she heard the dog barking. She had looked out, I was looking specifically to see what she told me, but she just said that he was pacing alongside the fence barking.
Along the fence facing Brandy's house, correct?
She didn't say facing, but the fence runs north and south in between 908 and then their address.
In between her house and Brandy's house, so
Yes.
it would have to, the dog would have, if it's facing that fence, it would have to be
Just
facing.
running, she just said running along the, pacing back and forth along the
Not,
fence.
not along the back wood line, along the fence towards Brandy's house.
She said along the fence,
Okay.
the property line.
Okay. Do you recall Mr. Scott advising that when he arrived home around 1:15 in the morning, the white SUV was still at Brandy's house?
No, he didn't tell me anything about the SUV.
You don't recall that? Or it's
I would
not
have
notated in the
documented it.
report?
He wouldn't.
Okay. No further questions for the witness.
Any cross on the property?
I know the testimony of the witnesses would have been left up to me, Your Honor, so if I'd ask that I can do this questioning.
What's that?
The testimony of the witnesses in question would have been mine, so if I can do this, okay. As it relates to that fence, it's obviously a fence that encloses the entirety of the backyard, right?
Yes, sir.
It's not just on one side, there's three
No,
sides
sir.
of it.
Yes.
So it goes down the side that adjoins Ms. Peters, across the back, which adjoins the woods, and then up the other side, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I want to clarify that. As far as the dog running, did she say it was running along the fence line, or did she say which fence line?
She said pacing back and forth alongside their privacy fence.
Okay.
And he paced against the side of the fence, which is running on the property line between them and 908 Saddle Creek.
Okay. All right.
Any further, Mr. President? I don't see any hearsay section to come into play, so I'll sustain the state's objection as to that testimony. All right, we'll take 5 minutes.
Delacruz trying to let him know about the court's order, so.
Is that who the next witness is gonna be? Is that gonna be who the next witness is?
Ms. Timmons?
No, okay, Timmons is next.
Yes, sir.
Right, you got her in?
Yes, sir.
Everybody be seated, please. Call your next witness, Mr. Prince.
This time the defense would recall Cece Timmons.
All right, if you'd face, she's previously testified in front of the jury.
Yes, she has.
All right, you remain under oath, Ms. Timmons.
Ms.
You may
Timmons,
proceed.
thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Timmons, can you spell your first and last name for the court reporter again?
CIESLYTIMMONS.
Ms. Timmons, tell us a little more about your relationship with Brandy.
I had met Brandy like 6 months prior to her, us hanging out. And we both had 3 kids. She had the 2 girls and a boy, and I got 2 boys and a girl. And the kids, she used to hang out. And we both pretty much had the same routine. Take our kids to child care and come back and do all our things. And then after daycare, the kids will hang out and we'll hang out. Every Thursday, we used to watch the First 48. And we just, sometimes have seafood.
Had y'all gotten pretty close by the time of her murder?
Yeah, because in November, my birthday was the 9th, and then the classic was coming up, and the fair was around that time, and me and her, she invited me to work at the fair for this church.
Okay.
So it was pretty cool.
You spend a lot of time together?
Yeah, in the last little bit of time, like around November time, yeah, we got a little close.
Did you interact with her at some point in the afternoon of November 19th, 2010, the day that she was killed?
No, I didn't see her the day that she was killed.
When was it that she came over to your house with a letter in hand?
That had to be the 18th, maybe the 18th or something.
Okay. May I approach the witness?
You may.
What's already been entered into evidence. State Exhibit 98. Do you recognize this envelope?
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah.
Is that the envelope Randy brought to your house the day before her murder?
Yes.
Did you know Brandy well enough to know when she seemed scared, when she looked scared?
Yeah, it kind of wasn't that hard.
Did she ask you to look at the envelope as well when she brought it over that day?
Yeah.
And you read it?
Mm-hmm.
And the letter read, or the envelope read rather, death before dishonor, word is bond, bond is life, and a man should give his life before his word fails. Say what you mean what you say. With instructions, dear mailman, if this letter happens to get lost, just send it to heaven, because it's going to an angel. That was the day before her murder, correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did she appear scared when she was reading that letter and discussing it with you?
She was scared when she got to my house because she had already read it. She was bringing it so I can see it. She had already read it, so she was already freaked out about it. So that's why she brought it over there so I can see it.
Okay. And upon reading that, how did you feel about it?
I was scared too.
Scared of who?
Carlos Santos, the person I had been looking up for her on my computer.
Well, I don't want to get into that, but is that the person who the letter is from?
Yes, sir.
That's the name listed on the envelope?
Yes, sir.
Okay. He was an inmate at the Federal Detention Center. Is that the address on the letter?
Yes, sir.
Okay. When you testified during the state's case in chief that you were hesitant to come and didn't want to come, you said you were scared of someone. Who was it you were scared of?
Carlos Santos.
No further questions for the witness at this time.
Ross?
Ms. Timmons, I'm gonna use photocopies of that document. Wayne, push your arm.
You may.
Looking at this, it also appears, it says that he thanks God for you and asks that he looks after you and our 3 angels. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
If you would say yes or no,
Yes.
it would help this lady out, but, okay, please.
And on the other letter, he says, send pictures, boo. Right?
Yes.
Okay. So it appears he's talking, when he says, talking about angels, he's talking about her and her children, right?
If you want, I would assume.
Okay. And, I mean, I understand that she was scared, but these are kind of a little, almost like a pickup line, if you will, right? Calling somebody an angel, you must.
It depends on your mind state.
Okay. Fair to say that she was kind of freaked out, maybe because this guy in prison's trying to hit on her and calling her angels and things like that and saying some weird stuff, right?
I would object to speculation.
Let's sustain.
Okay. So you don't know exactly what it is that freaked her out over this, right?
I don't know.
Okay. All right, no further questions.
Redirect.
What freaked you out about it?
What freaked me out about it?
Well, it's already been answered once, to a certain extent without objections. I think the objection been waived. I'll overrule the objection.
Ms. Timmons?
I mean, it was just weird. Death before dishonor. I mean, it was just weird.
No further questions.
Any juror have a question of this witness? This item is in evidence. I mean, these are things you'll get a chance to see. All right, you can step down. Your next witness, please.
Time the defense will call Pat Sanford.
No, I don't know whether it was clear on the record or not, but as far as Ms. Timmons goes, state is retaining her. We do not lose her. The court didn't inquire as to this particular time.
Do you want it kept or not?
Yes.
Come up here, please. If you'd face the clerk and be sworn, please.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony given in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Have a seat. Slide up the microphone, please, sir.
Sir, can you please introduce yourself to the jury, spelling your first and last name for the court reporter?
My name is Patrick, Patrick, Sanford, Sanford. I'm a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
And how long have you been employed in that capacity?
Approximately 18 years.
Okay. In 2016, were you contacted by someone from the State Attorney's Office or Tallahassee Police Department in reference to this case?
Yes, I was.
Were you asked to obtain a buccal swab for DNA comparison purposes from a person of interest in that case?
Yes, I was.
Is that person Angel Antonio Avila Quinones?
That's correct.
Did you obtain a buccal swab from that person?
Yes, I did.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
The record reflects on the witness has been marked for identification as defense exhibit 10. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
And can you tell based on packaging that that is the buccal swab you obtained from Mr. Avila?
Based on the packaging, yes, correct. It's my signature.
This time would move in evidence with been pre-marked for identification only as defense 10 and as defense 10.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Be admitted.
I have no further questions.
Anything?
Yes, Your Honor. Agent Sanford?
Yes, sir.
Agent Sanford, why is it that you had to get involved in getting that buckle swab?
To travel over to Italy to actually interview and actually obtain it from him, because on Italian grounds, we had to go to the U.S. Embassy to actually have authority to go and take the buccal swab from him.
Okay, so this wasn't done in the United States then?
No, this individual lived in Italy.
Okay, and why was it that, are you aware why we couldn't just have Mr. Avila transported to the United States in order to take this buckle swab?
He had been deported from the United States.
As an FBI agent, do you have the ability to access official government documentation as it relates to deportation and ICE documents, if you will?
Yes, I do.
Okay, are those ICE documents something that is regularly made by the United States government?
Yes, they are.
And are they regularly maintained by the United States government?
That's correct.
And whenever those documentation as it relates to any kind of deportation are they made on or around the time of any kind of information that's being entered?
That's correct.
Okay, and those are official government documents?
Yes, they are.
And have you had a chance to go back and review those documents?
Yes, I have.
And you mentioned that Mr. Avila had been deported. When was he deported?
Approximately, I believe it was April of 2009.
Okay, and in April of 2009, as far as those documents go, and I'm not asking you to remember off the top of your head because I understand they're secure and we can't print them out, but do they record like the flight he flew out on and all that kind of information?
Yes, they do.
Okay, would they also include any documentation of him coming back into the country?
That's correct.
And to your knowledge and review of those files, he had never entered back into the country after his deportation in 2009, correct?
That's correct. He did not come back in the United States after 2009.
Whenever you went over to Italy, did he agree and travel to actually meet you?
Yes, he did.
And do you know how long it was that he traveled to meet you?
I think he had to take like a 4-hour train ride to come and meet me.
And he met you where?
In Rome, Italy, at the U.S. Embassy.
So he actually came into essentially what is U.S. territory at the embassy in order to do this?
That's correct.
Fair to say he was cooperative?
Very cooperative.
No further questions?
Redirect.
Yes.
What was Mr. Avila's country of origin?
I believe it was Colombia.
And what was he deported for?
He was deported for, he was arrested on a boat off the coast and then transported to the United States. I believe it was 2000, and he served a 9-year sentence in the United States.
For what?
I believe it was drug smuggling.
Okay. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Let the record reflect it. Let the record reflect, going to show the witness what's been pre-marked for identification only is the defense and prosecution certified copies of federal court documents. Can you take a look at those and tell me whether you recognize them?
I don't know if I've ever seen the actual indictment itself. But it appears to be an indictment in February of 2000.
Documents essentially detailing the facts and circumstances and ultimate convictions for the criminal case which led to his deportation.
That's what it appears to be.
Okay. Does that appear to be a true and accurate copy?
As far as I can tell without reading all of it, I don't, like I said, I don't think I've ever seen the actual indictment.
It's stamped as a certified copy from the federal district clerk of court, correct?
Correct.
And what district is that out of?
The Middle District of Florida.
Moving the evidence at this time has been pre-marked for identification only as defense 3 and as defense 3.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
All right, it'll be admitted.
Sir, fair to say that the only way you would have a record of whether somebody came into the country is if they came in the country illegally, using their passport as opposed to crossing the border through Mexico or something along those lines.
That's correct.
No further questions for the witness.
Any juror have a question of this witness?
Your Honor, if I can, he asked questions about that document that was introduced, if I can recross on that.
You may.
Agent Sanford, you mentioned that he was on a boat off the coast. To your knowledge, I don't know whether you need to go back and review this, isn't it true that he was arrested actually by the United States Coast Guard and FBI agents on a Coast Guard cutter in the Philippines, and then transported to the United States on the U.S. Coast Guard cutter?
Yes, that's correct. He was arrested off, I don't know by who, but he was arrested off of the coast of the United States and then transported to the United States.
And we're actually talking about the Philippines, so we're talking about like way, way far away from the United States.
That's what I understand, yes, sir.
Okay. And then he was transported back to, and actually held trial in the state of, in Florida, because, quite frankly, that's where they got the best sentence.
That's correct.
Okay.
Anything further, Mr. Prince?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Any juror have a question of this witness? All right, you can step down. We need to keep him further.
No, Your Honor.
He'll be retained and go about this.
All right, be on call. Call your next witness.
Your Honor, I need to instruct the next witness before he testifies regarding
They're
limitations.
going to be the one I made the order.
Yes, sir.
All right, let's let the jury step out, please. Let's get him in.
I do.
Have a seat. I wanted to make sure there was no confusion on your part. If there is any confusion, we clear it up before the jury's here. I have entered an order allowing you to express your opinion that you expressed yesterday here in the courtroom, but I am prohibiting you from going into the facts, the substance of what people told you. That's hearsay and inadmissible. We're not going to have you telling the jury what other people told you in substance. I don't think it was offered yesterday, but I also ruled that I guess at deposition you offered an opinion as to Mr. Segura's guilt or innocence. I have also ordered that you not go into that. I don't know that the defense was even attempting to elicit that or not, but that was done at the deposition. Was that something you were intending to get into, Mr. Brent?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Do you understand my ruling?
I do.
Can I clarify something about the hearsay, Your Honor? You're talking about hearsay, that out-of-court statements about the facts of this case from witnesses with knowledge.
Right. And in particular, I know he talked about what Mr. Santos had told him about Ms. Peters in particular. That's what I'm aiming at. I don't want you getting into those type of facts about what you were told about this case or any of the people involved in this case. Is that clear enough?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Anything further, Mr. Prince?
Clear.
State, think we need to clarify anything else?
there was one issue I discussed with Mr. Prince, about what he was relying on other experts were going to testify to, and none of those experts have yet testified. But the forensic expert, specifically what I'm thinking about, whenever he formed some opinions based upon what he had discussed with the forensic expert, and the forensic expert has not yet testified. Like the alleged
Well,
footprint.
get to your point, Mr. Evans. What do you want me to tell him?
Well, I just want to put on the record, Mr. Prince has represented to me that the forensic expert is going to testify, and anything Dr. Delacruz is going to have relied on from any testing done by the forensic person is going to be put into evidence.
Well, he can rely upon it, whether it's put in evidence or not. He just can't relate it to the jury. So what are you asking me to do?
And
I mean, an expert can rely on hearsay. He can rely on inadmissible evidence. He just can't turn around and regurgitate it to the jury and in some backdoor manner present the evidence to the jury that is otherwise inadmissible, which is what I'm trying to prevent with my order. So what is it you want me to do?
I think that's made it clear that on that point that he can't have verbatim conversations that he had with any one particular person.
Okay. In saying that, if the state attacks his basis for his opinion, you may well open the door to allow that to be done. So you need to keep the court's ruling in mind if you're doing the cross-examination, that if you attack what he said and the response to that is to go into the substance of it, I will allow that on redirect. So, so I don't know. So are you asking me to give some further instruction or no?
Not at this time.
All right. Mr. Prince?
I would ask for a little bit of additional clarification, but make sure I'm complying with what the court is ruling. As I did in the hearing yesterday, I would intend to ask him about what, if any, facts present here he believes consistent with the manner in which a drug cartel would commit the offense. He pointed to several factors yesterday, including that multiple people, for example, were involved, that there was foreign DNA under the fingernails. Would he be permitted to point to those specific facts or just say that multiple people are involved and leave it at that?
Well, certainly he can talk about things about the crime scene. That, what I don't want him to get into is somebody told him Ms. Peters was a drug dealer and go into the substance of what somebody told and just in a backdoor way get into what should be put on the stand and be subject to cross-examination if somebody's going to say it. So the rule, what the rule provides or the statute provides is he can't get inadmissible evidence in that manner.
Yes, sir.
Those are in evidence already. Clearly, he can respond to those.
Thank you, Your Honor.
So, right. Do you have any question about the ruling?
I have a question. So I reviewed reports indicating or statements by certain people, Mr. Santos, and therefore, that Ms. Peters was selling drugs and so forth. Can I touch on that or no?
No, that is what I'm talking about.
Okay. I want to clarify that. Thank you.
All right. Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Let's have a jury, please. All right, everybody be seated. Go ahead, next witness, Mr. Prince.
It's time, Your Honor, the defense will call Dr. Jesus Delacruz. Dr. Delacruz, can you please introduce yourself to the jury and spell both your first and last name for the court report?
Yes, my name is Dr. Jesse Delacruz. My name is spelled Jesse. My last name is spelled capital DE, capital LA, capital CRUZ.
What do you do for a living, Dr. Delacruz?
I'm primarily a gang consultant, expert witness throughout the United States.
What does it mean to be a gang or a gang consultant?
Well, my job is to educate juries or different juries, in this case, this particular jury, about the characteristics, the behaviors, the culture concerning gangs.
Okay. And in order to be able to provide that type of information, tell us a little bit about your real-world experience dealing with organized crime, gangs, and cartels.
My personal?
Yes, sir.
Well, at the age of approximately 13 years old, I joined a gang. I was a member of a street gang, a local street gang in Wood Lake, California, which is Northern California. Now, this is way before the North-South conflict started. When I was about 16 years old, I moved to Los Angeles and lived in Los Angeles. And of course, I had the gang mentality, so I took the gang mentality with me. And Los Angeles is, I think, #1 for gangs. So of course, I joined a gang there. I joined a local street gang by the name of the King Cobras. And when I was about 19, 20 years old, I got arrested and was sent to prison. I arrived in the Department of Corrections in March of 1973. And in June of 1973, I joined an organization called the Nuestra Familia, which was at that time in its infancy stages, So it's a criminal organization specifically. In 1976, I realized that this organization they were really way out there, right? And I decided to walk away. So in August of 1976, when I paroled, I left the criminal organization. However, I continued as a criminal until the age of 45. I was no longer involved in either a street gang or a prison gang. I was just a criminal until the age of 45. And when I was released from Folsom State Prison on April the 2nd, 1996. And then in June of 1996, I entered a treatment center I was also a heroin addict, and I completed that, and in January of 1997, I enrolled in community college, and in 2014, I obtained a doctorate. And during all this process, my focus, my study was gangs and what they were doing, not only locally, but statewide. How did the gangs in California impact the nation? I was looking at cartels. I was looking at researching cartels. I was researching the Maras Salvatruchas. I was researching gangs in general.
Let me ask you some more questions about your own personal experience with Mexican cartels. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, I've had contact with the Mexican cartels, except that at that time they weren't called Mexican cartels. They were just groups of individuals that sold drugs. And because I was a heroin addict, I would go to, there was a lady by the name of La Nacha who controlled all of Juarez, Mexico, right on the border of El Paso. And we would go down there and we would buy furniture. And in the furniture, they would put the heroin, and then we'd come back. So I had that kind of interaction with that lady. And she sort of took a liking to me. She was an older lady. And then in Tijuana, I dealt with one of the Felix brothers. But he wasn't as big as he is, well, he's dead now, but as he became the Tijuana cartel. And also I dealt with a guy named Roberto, who was also a big drug dealer, and also a guy named Toñito, who was also a big drug dealer. And then, of course, when I was in the Nuestra Familia, through proxy, individuals that were members of the organization, they would go out into the streets and make connections with people who were involved in the Mexican cartels or big drug dealing organizations from Mexico. And so I would indirectly know what was going on because, the member who was also a brother would inform us of what was going on.
Okay. What about close friends, family, and associates? Tell me about how their experience and interaction with Mexican cartels has informed your knowledge and experience.
Well, unfortunately, I come from well, maybe not unfortunately, but I come from a family, a huge family. I got family in Texas and family in Los Angeles. And I have family members, nephews, and cousins that are currently members of Mexican cartels. Two of them in Dallas and one of them in Houston. But the one in Houston is currently serving a prison sentence. But nevertheless, they're members of cartels. And, every year, every Christmas, for the Christmas break, I go to Dallas and spend time with my sisters, which are the mothers of my nephews, and we talk. And, of course, I ask them about different things. And then I had a cousin who in February was shot by the military. He was a member of the Zetas, and he had just gotten out of the federal penitentiary, and he died as a result of the shootout in Reynosa, Tamaulipas, in February.
Okay. Now, you've also spoken a little bit about your education and the breadth of your research and the type of your research. Can you tell us more about that?
Okay. So, as I indicated earlier, in 1997, in the spring of 1997, I enrolled in a community college, and I began that process. Then in two and a half years later, I transferred to a university, California State University, Stanislaus in Turlock, California. And I obtained my bachelor's in sociology with a minor in deviance. So I was looking at gangs and crime in general, and how they interacted or with society. In 2000, and I got my BA in 2001. I continued on at the same university, and in 2003 obtained a master's degree in social work. So, I worked, as a social worker for different agencies as a result of graduating with a master's. But primarily I worked with individuals that were, involved in gang activity, attempting to, disassociate themselves from gangs and so forth and so on. And I would, provide them with resources and try to help them make the transition a little bit easier. In 2010, I reapplied and went back to school, and I got an educational doctorate, and with the emphasis on, again, gangs. So my dissertation, it was a study of gangs, but primarily the study of one gang, Latino gangs, in the city of Stockton, California.
Now, in the course of your doctoral education, did you have an opportunity to research and read scholarly articles, reviews, books pertaining to the structure and organization of South American organized crime, Mexican cartels, and the interaction between those with American criminal organizations?
Sure. In the process of doing research, it was a scientific research study that I conducted, using methodology, qualitative methodology. I had to review and read and scour, many libraries and books and the internet, and I read countless books on different types of organizations, including cartels and including the Manos Salvatruchas, the Jamaicans, different organizations internationally and nationally, to be able to determine whether or not there was a consistency between these organizations. And what I found was the consistency was they were all criminals, but they all did things a little bit different in some areas. They were not all alike. The only thing they had that was in common is that they were criminals. That's it. But other than that, there was little different characteristics here and there that distinguished the Manos Salvatruchas from the Mexican cartels, from the Mexican mafia, from the Aryan Brotherhood, from the, Nuestra Familia. Those are criminal organizations. I studied all of those, but I also studied criminal street gangs and local street gangs. Not necessarily local from that particular area, but I mean local street gangs from different communities throughout the nation.
In the course of your studies, did you have an opportunity, let me ask it this way. In the course of either your studies or your real-world experience, have you had specific experience with the Los Zetas cartel?
Yes.
And tell me about that.
Well, like I said, I had a cousin that was involved in Los Zetas. He was in it. He was a member of it, and me and him, we interacted, talked to each other on many occasions. There was one specific occasion when we talked about certain things, and the difference between me and, say, law enforcement is that someone that is in an organization like that knows that I was either involved at some point, and so they trust me to a certain degree. They don't trust me to tell me, like about murders and all that other junk, or crimes they're going to commit or crimes they committed, but just about interactions and things that are going on. And so they're more readily open with a person like me that they understand has been around and is not a threat to them, right? So especially because he's a family member, right?
Yes, sir. Have you ever had an opportunity to testify in court as an expert witness on these topics?
On gangs?
Yes, sir.
I've testified throughout the nation probably 35, 36 times in front of juries, probably 4, 6 times in preliminary hearings before the juries, evidentiary hearings 6 or 7 or 8 times, I'm not sure. Quite a few, maybe 50 times total.
How many additional cases have you consulted as an expert witness regarding these issues on?
About 450.
Okay. Any of those cases specifically involve Mexican cartels?
I did one in Modesto where the young man was accused of killing a member of the Mexican cartel. I did one of those cases.
Any of those cases specifically involve criminal organizations, not specifically criminal street gangs, but criminal organizations?
No.
Okay. In the course of your studies, did you have an opportunity to learn about how Mexican cartels interact with and do business with American criminal organizations?
Yes, I did. You want me to explain it?
Well, at this time, I would tender the witness, Your Honor.
Any more dire at this point?
Not at this point, I'll say across.
All right.
Sir, tell us about the interaction between these 3 levels of drug trafficking organizations. Tell us about the interaction between South American drug cartels or families, Mexican cartels, and American criminal organizations.
Okay, so well, as many people know, I don't know if you folks know, there's a lot of cocaine. Colombia is an area where the weather and everything permits them to grow quality coca leaves, which then in turn they turn into cocaine. So Colombia is primarily one of the, if not the #1 cocaine supplier of the world. So they needed to figure out how to get rid of this product. And so what happened was they connected with, initially, I think it was Chapo Guzman. I don't know if you folks are familiar with him, but he's a Sinaloa cartel individual. And he was instrumental in making the connection between the Mexican cartel and the Colombians. So they began to work with each other. They would bring in the cocaine to Mexico. The Mexican cartels would then transport it into America. The guy in charge of transporting into America would connect with somebody from America, right? Maybe a street gang member, or organized crime, for example, a member of the Mexican Mafia or a member of the Nuestra Familia, primarily, or a street gang member like Logan Heights in San Diego, because it's right by the border. And they would then give the drugs to them, and then these individuals would then distribute the drugs through contacts that they had on the streets. That's the way it works.
Okay, so I guess let me make sure I understand. Essentially, South American is the supply side, the Mexican cartels are the middlemen. And then the distributors, the local distributors, will get their stuff from more organized American criminal organizations.
Yeah, because America is the #1 nation of abusers as far as drugs, right? And America has a lot of money.
What is explain for us the financial relationship between the Mexican cartels and the American criminal organizations that distribute their drugs. Specifically, what I mean is explain how a loss on the distribution end affects profit on the Mexican cartel side.
Well, the Mexican cartels do not take losing money very lightly. And there's some things that will happen to the individual. I'll give you an example. Let's say that I decide that I want to work with a Mexican cartel, and they offer me, they say, look, you're going to drive this car across the border, and I don't know how much drugs is in there, right? But you're going to take it across the border, you're going to deliver it to point B, wherever that is, right? We're going to pay you $20,000 to do that, okay? So I decide, okay, so I take it, but I get arrested, and I lose the shipment. So what they do is they go kill my entire family to get payment. And because they really don't know what happened, you know, and they don't care about that you got arrested. They don't care about that. The only thing they care about is that they lost the money, and you were the one in charge of that merchandise, and you lost it. The fact that you got arrested has nothing to do with them. So they go, generally speaking, they'll go and kill the entire family.
Okay. Now, you've had a chance to review crime scene photos and speak to the defense forensic expert about the forensic aspects of this case, correct?
I have.
Okay. Without getting into exactly what they are yet, did you observe indicators of cartel involvement in the crime scene forensics of this case?
I did.
Okay. Tell me about how the idea of multiple individuals being involved in the commission of the offense plays into that assessment.
Into what now?
Tell me about how the defense forensic experts' evaluation of the evidence indicating multiple people were involved in the commission of the offense plays into your analysis of the case.
Well, generally speaking, what happens is in a case where the cartels are involved, there's always more than one person. Always. It's not never one person. There's always 3, 4, 5, depends, you know, how many people are going to get killed, but there's at least 3 to 4 people. And sometimes even 2 carloads of people, depending on where they're going, what they're going to do, and who they're going to kill, and how many people they're going to kill. And so the evidence that I reviewed indicated to me that there was, you know, more than one person.
In reviewing that evidence, did you have an opportunity to specifically discuss that evidence with Michael Knox, the defense forensic expert?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Tell me, I want to ask you about a piece of evidence in particular, the fact that FDLE analyst Joe Allen Brown identified foreign female DNA under the victim's fingernails. what, if any, significance does it have to you that a female's DNA was found under the victim's fingernails?
Well, that's one of the methods they use to get into a house or get the person to open the door is by using a female. So primarily, the female would be used first. She would go knock on the door, ring the doorbell, whatever the case may be, so that the person would feel comfortable, right? Because it's a female, and so the person, the intended victim, whoever, right, would open the door, then opens the door and allows the opportunity for the individuals who are usually hiding in the shadows, right, so that the person doesn't see. So when the door opens, they're able to go in.
Tell me a little bit about, in reviewing the evidence, how the fact that some of the victims of the offense here were children plays into your analysis.
Okay, well, I've been involved in this phenomenon for a long time, you know, personally involved in it, and studied it, and now, you know, as a gang expert, talk to people all the time. And one of the things that I know for sure is that gangs in America, Mexican Mafia, the Italians, Mafia, the Nuestra Familia, the Aryan Brotherhood, prison gangs, different types of criminal organizations in America, do not generally kill kids. It's like something that's frowned upon, and there will be consequences in the end of it. Women, okay. Once in a while, they'll allow a woman to get killed, but not children. So the Mexican cartels, on the other hand, they kill everybody. They don't care if it's child, if it's two child, if the woman is pregnant, it doesn't matter. So when I learned that children were killed, that was a red flag for me.
Okay, and jumping back for a moment to the fact that there was foreign female DNA identified under the victim's fingernails, do you have any specific experience yourself with that particular tactic being utilized by cartels?
Well, yes, I do. In August 31st, actually, 1977, the Nuestra Familia, which is a prison criminal organization in California, which has now spread throughout the United States, went after me, 3 members and a female. And so what they did was they used the lady, the girl, to knock on the door to see if I was living. They went to my mother's house and they knocked on the door, and this is what was found out later in the testimony, that they knocked on the door. My brother answered the door. She had gone out with my brother. I knew the lady. I knew the young lady. It was, and I wasn't there. And so she closed the door. The other guys were hiding. They didn't go in because they didn't see me. They went back to the car. They said that, he's not there. So then they decided to kill my brother just to teach me a lesson. So they went back, knocked on the door again. This time it wasn't the female because he had already opened the door to the female. So when they knocked the second time, he thought, from what I understand, that it was her. And they went in and stabbed him 47 times and killed him.
Let me ask you about the Zetas in particular. You said that you have specific experience with the Los Zetas cartel.
I've researched a lot of information. I've spoken to people, about them, but yeah, I do.
And you have family members that are members of the Los Zetas cartel?
Yes.
Okay. Do the Zetas have a particular symbol associated with them?
They usually they have the ace of spade. That's what they use, their symbol. Mm-hmm. They use that like their calling card whenever they commit a crime. They usually will leave some type of symbol that symbolizes a spade. The ace of spade, one.
When they commit offenses, when the Zetas carry out murders related to their business, then do they leave things like shovels or spades at the scene to identify for other members of the criminal world that this is what happens to people that violate our rules?
They will leave, generally speaking, they will leave something, a calling card, an ace of spade, or a spade, which is a shovel. They will leave that, and that is not left for law enforcement. That's left for the underworld. People that are in the underworld know that, and that's the message to them. It's not to the police, it's to the underworld, to let them know that if you mess with us, we're going to kill your entire family, we're going to kill everybody involved in your life, so that everybody knows it's them.
Did you have an opportunity to speak with defense forensic expert Michael Knox about the spade or small shovel that was found in this case?
I did.
Did you discuss with him the fact that it was located in such proximity to the victim's body that had it either been used or in the location where it was found, it would have been covered in blood spatter?
I did.
Did you discuss with him that the fact that touch DNA was found on it, but no blood anywhere on the spade?
Correct.
What did that indicate to you?
That it was a message.
Clarify for me, if you can as well, what happens up the chain when drugs are fronted. And so if, specifically what I mean is if the supply side Colombians front drugs to the Mexicans who front drugs to the American organizations, how does it impact the whole chain of supply if the money for those drugs are not paid back?
How does it impact it?
Yes.
Well, it probably doesn't impact it because they got so many, but I think what you're asking me is how do they react?
What do they do about it?
What do they do about it? Okay. So, for example, let's say that someone from the Mexican cartel gives me the drugs. They say, okay, we're going to front you, meaning they're going to give me X amount of dope, let's say $20,000 worth or 5 kilos of cocaine, and they want X amount of dollars. Okay. So then me, being the middleman between the cartel and America, I then enlist the help of individuals on the streets. And then somebody from the streets, the term in the streets is burns me, or he steals from me, right? And I don't have the money to pay the individual that gave me the money. So the cartel doesn't care about this guy. He made the deal with me, right? Now, their only concern is my money. I want my money. That's it. They don't care who stole what, whatever. It's none of their business. Now, if I say, look, here, I'm going to pay you out of my pocket, then they're okay. They're okay with that, you see? But now, if I say, but I want you to take care of this person for stealing from me, well, they'll gladly do it because really they're stealing from them.
So when they can't recoup their money, what is the preferred method of dealing with a situation like that?
Brutality. They go in and they kill everybody in the entire family, and they do it in such a manner that everyone knows that you don't mess with us. So, brutally.
No further questions for the witness at this time.
Probably take a lunch break and do cross after lunch. Is that okay, Mr. Evans?
Yeah.
So you okay with it?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and take a lunch break now. Let's be back and ready to go at 1:30, please. All right, 1:30. Have a nice lunch.